Are you an architecture lover and you're planning your stay in Florence? I have a good news for you. Florence is a paradise for all interested in the history of architecture. In the town you can admire the masterpieces of Romanesque style, such as the Baptistery. There are the most important iconic buildings who mark the beginning of the Renaissance, such as Brunelleschi's Dome or his Ospedale degli Innocenti. It's enough to walk through the streets of the city to learn more about the evolution of the architectonical language. And so let's discover the masterpieces of the Florentine architecture together. The Florentine Baptistery is one of the most ancient buildings still standing in town. It dates back to the 11th century and it has always been a very important symbolical place for the people of Florence, a temple dedicated to the patron saint of the city, Saint John the Baptist. On the outside, the baptistry is fully covered with a beautiful marble decoration. The marble covers also the roof of this unique construction. The decoration includes the geometrical patterns composed of two different stones, the white marble from Carrara and the green marble from Prato. This geometrical style will then influence all the other architectures in Florence, such as the outside of the Florentine Cathedral or the project for the facade of Santa Maria Novella, designed by Leon Battista Alberti in the 15th century. The big architectonical renovation of Florence started at the very end of the 13th century, when the new cathedral was under construction and when Arnolfo di Cambio, a very important medieval architect, designed also the today's Palazzo Vecchio, at that time the Palazzo dei Priori, the Florentine town hall that became the house of the Republican government of the Florentine Republic. The structure represents a typical example of a medieval fortified palace of power, where the priors would reside for the 2 months of their term, completely isolated from the rest of the city. This is why next to the Palazzo dei Priori, starting from the 1370s, Andrea Orcagna designed the loggia, the arches, for the rulers to communicate with the citizens. Under the loggia, important civic festivities would happen. The rulers would announce the new regulations. This created also the square in front, Piazza della Signoria, where the power was exercised and performed in medieval Florence. Later on, when the Medici family took over the government in Florence, they not only moved into the Palazzo Vecchio, turning it into their private residence, but they also transformed the loggia into a museum, a sculpture garden, where they displayed both the Roman artworks from their collections and the modern works that they were at that time commissioning from the greatest masters, such as Gian Bologna or Benvenuto Cellini. Today, Piazza della Signoria is one of the most interesting squares in Florence. The same Arnolfo di Cambio, who designed the Palazzo dei Priori, was also possibly a designer of the Franciscan church of Santa Croce. This immense basilica showcased the features of the Italian Gothic style, with this evident verticality, the pointed arches and the big stained glass windows that decorate the main chapel of the church. This convent became the center of the Franciscan community in the city, and later on the chapels around the main altar were decorated by the best Florentine painters with the monumental frescoes. You will see there the frescoes by Giotto, Taddeo Gaddi, Agnolo Gaddi and other 14th century masters. The most important architect who marked the beginning of the Renaissance in Florence was Filippo Brunelleschi. Starting from 1417, he built and designed the unique structures of the first orphanage in Europe, Ospedale degli Innocenti. The project of the portico of the hospital, that is characterized by the loggia, the regular rhythm of the arches supported by the columns, is the best example of the immense change of an architecture based on proportion, calculation, symmetry, that are the new characteristics of the Renaissance. The inner part of the hospital will be organized around the internal courts, a bigger one for the boys and smaller one for the girls. And the hospital became the shelter for the many abandoned kids in Florence. It was a very, very important charity institution in town. Brunelleschi's important projects included also the private chapel for the Pazzi family that he designed, transforming the space of the chapter house inside of the Santa Croce convent. The Pazzi chapel was started in 1443 and the works were interrupted in 1478 when the Pazzi family was exiled from Florence after having organized a conspiration against Lawrence the Magnificent de' Medici. The chapel is a very interesting evolution of Brunelleschi research into the holy architecture, where he tries to suggest a form, architectonical form, based on a Greek cross with the four arms of the cross of the equal length. He designs also a beautiful portico in front of the chapel, introducing the harmony of the architectonical elements, using beautiful columns inspired by the classical antiquity and placing at the top of the dome a beautiful lantern that looks almost like a little ancient temple. All those characteristics, columns, temples, the use of the form of the circle, they really created a new visual experience for the citizens of Florence, and the Pazzi Chapel became one of the most revolutionary works designed by Brunelleschi. The most revolutionary and influential project of the Brunelleschi is definitely his dome. The project from 1418, thanks to which Brunelleschi managed to solve the big question of how to close the Florentine cathedral. Brunelleschi designed a double-shelled dome. In reality, there are two domes above the cathedral. The smaller one, which is the inner dome, covered by the bigger external dome. The two structures are connected with each other by big ribs that run at the corners and by a system of internal junctions that keep those two parts together. This system allowed Brunelleschi to get rid of a medieval centering that used to support the bricks during the construction of the domes. His dome was a self-supporting dome. That solution was really a brilliant escape from the many technological problems he could have had, and allowed him also to develop a very innovative system of mobile scaffoldings that he attached to the already standing part of his dome. Inside of the cathedral, during the construction of the dome, he built an immense crane that transferred all the heavy objects needed by the workers at the top. The dome is an incredible example of innovation that actually happened in 15th century Florence, and we wouldn't have the genius of Leonardo da Vinci, his brilliant machines, without all the technological novelties introduced by Brunelleschi. Another important Renaissance architect who was active in Florence was Leon Battista Alberti. He collaborated with a Florentine merchant, Giovanni Rucellai, designing for him the facade of Santa Maria Novella, the important Dominican church in the city. The facade was made during the second half of the 15th century, and again, just like the Ospedale degli Innocenti, it features all the basic rules of the Renaissance architecture: proportion, symmetry, inspiration taken from the most perfect forms, such as circle and square. In the upper part of the facade, you can see a form with the four pilasters supporting the triangular coronation that is clearly inspired by the front of classical temples. Think only about the Pantheon in Rome. The whole facade can be inscribed in a perfect square. At the same time, despite the fact that Alberti renews completely the architectonical language, he refers to the Florentine tradition by the use of the same geometrical patterns composed with the green and white marble that Florentine people knew very well from the baptistry and the cathedral. This idea of renewing with a great respect for the local tradition is one of my favorite elements of Alberti's facade. Collaborating with Giovanni Rucellai, Alberti designs also for his family the new palace and the loggia that are located in Via della Vigna Nuova, few steps from Santa Maria Novella. This design was one of the first Renaissance palaces built in 15th century Florence. The front again features many elements inspired by the classical antiquity. The columns that divide the windows on the facade on the three levels follow the succession of the architectonical orders from Doric through Ionic until Corinthian that Alberti saw probably on the Colosseum in Rome. Behind the bench that runs along the street, he also placed a very particular pattern with the stones forming a net. This is the opus reticulatum, one of the patterns that he saw on the Roman walls and that he could observe in Rome. Next to the palace stands the loggia, where the Rucellai family could organize their marriages, funerals and other important family celebrations, displaying again their power and domination in town. Both the palace and the loggia carry the symbols of Giovanni, which is a veil, a symbol of fortune. Rucellai wanted to show himself as a man of success. Whatever he plans, wind blows into his sail and his project and with great success. This is an example of a Renaissance impresa, a visual symbol of an individual that features certain characteristics that he wants to communicate to the public. The Uffizi Gallery is today a very important, immense art museum where we go to admire Italian painting, but very few actually stop and admire the architecture of this unique complex. The Uffizi complex was designed starting from 1560 by Giorgio Vasari, one of the most important artistic personalities of Florence during the mid-16th century. Vasari, with his project for the Uffizi, summed up all the different experiences of the Florentine architecture from the 15th and the 16th centuries, joining together the architecture of Brunelleschi and Michelangelo. He designed his project using the two colors, the white and the gray, that are typical for Brunelleschi's project, for example, at San Lorenzo or in Santo Spirito. At the same time, he played in a rhythmical game with the voids. The palace is supported by the empty space of the portico and the wall that is actually filled in with windows on the first floor of the palace. The references to Michelangelo's architecture you can notice, for example, observing the windows where Vasari alters the different coronations, the triangular and the arched ones. These are the typical games, visual games of the late Renaissance architecture, the so-called mannerism. When the Medici family acquired from the Pittis the properties on the other side of the Arno River, across from Ponte Vecchio, starting from 1550, they extended the palace, creating a model for a private residence for an important ruling family. The Pitti Palace with the Boboli Gardens became a model for Palais de Luxembourg in Paris and other sumptuous residences across Europe. The palace grew with time. First the Ammanati designed the courtyard, then Giulio and Alfonso Parigi extended the volume of the main building to become, during the 19th century, this huge private residence that you can see in the Pitti Square today. The architecture follows the rustic style of the initial facade, designed possibly by Brunelleschi himself, with the big pillars of stone sticking out. This is a very rustic and powerful design for the front of such a big residence. Today, the Pitti Palace, besides its unique architecture, hosts many museums, the Palatine Gallery, the Modern Art Gallery, and it's a great museum hub that you can discover during your stay in Florence. These are my 10 favorite architectures in Florence. Do you have yours? Let me know in the comments. And if you're interested in a guided tour focused on the Florentine architecture, contact us. We will be happy to design your custom itinerary.